The sun cast a warm glow over the small town, but for Sarah, it felt like a distant memory. Each morning began with a ritual that had become both a comfort and a prison. As she sat on the edge of her bed, the world outside buzzed with life, yet she was ensnared in the grip of nosophobia, an overwhelming fear of disease that had taken root in her mind. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when she reveled in the simple joys of life, but the relentless tide of health scares and media coverage had transformed her reality into a labyrinth of anxiety. Sarah's first encounter with this fear occurred during a routine visit to the doctor for a cold. The waiting room was filled with the usual suspects: a mother with a coughing child, an elderly man with a bandaged hand, and a young woman nervously scrolling through her phone. As she sat there, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils, and her mind began to race. What if she caught something worse? What if the cough was a sign of something insidious? By the time her name was called, she was in a full-blown panic, convinced that the very air around her was laced with invisible threats. After that day, the fear snowballed. Sarah began to avoid crowded places, convinced that every sneeze or cough was a harbinger of doom. She meticulously sanitized her hands, her belongings, and even her thoughts. Friends and family grew concerned. "Just relax, it's all in your head," they would say, but to Sarah, the fear felt as real as the ground beneath her feet. She turned to online forums, where she found others like herself. But instead of comfort, she often encountered a cycle of shared fears that only intensified her anxiety. One evening, while scrolling through her social media feed, Sarah stumbled upon a post detailing the latest outbreak of a virus that had spread across the globe. It was as if a switch had flipped inside her. She felt her heart race, her palms sweat. The post was laden with sensational headlines and graphic images, designed to capture attention, but ultimately feeding the monster that lived inside her. She spent the next few hours researching the virus, reading every article, every comment, and every statistic. The more she read, the more she spiraled into despair. The world outside her window seemed to darken, a place filled with lurking dangers. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life became a series of calculated movements. She donned masks even when she was alone, convinced that the fabric barrier was her only protection. Grocery shopping became a military operation. She would wait until the store was nearly empty, armed with disinfectant wipes and gloves, meticulously cleaning every item before it entered her home. The act of shopping, once a mundane task, had morphed into a source of dread. She would often return home, her heart pounding, convinced that she had contracted something just by touching the shopping cart. Her relationships began to fray under the strain of her fears. Friends stopped inviting her out, unsure how to navigate her anxiety. "You can't live your life like this," one friend had said, her voice tinged with concern. Sarah knew they meant well, but their words felt like a dismissal of her reality. She couldn't explain that it wasn't just a simple fear, it was an all-consuming dread that colored every aspect of her existence. In her search for relief, Sarah turned to coping mechanisms that were both helpful and harmful. She discovered meditation and mindfulness practices that provided brief moments of peace, allowing her to focus on her breath and the present moment. Yet, the relief was often fleeting, overshadowed by the relentless tide of anxiety that crashed back in. She began journaling, pouring her thoughts onto paper in an attempt to untangle the web of fear that ensnared her. It was cathartic, but the act of writing often led her down darker paths as she documented every ache, every cough, and every worry. As Sarah navigated her daily life, she became acutely aware of the broader societal implications of her condition. The media played a significant role in shaping public perception of health and illness. Sensationalized headlines and fear-mongering stories permeated her social media feeds, creating an environment where fear thrived. She watched as friends shared articles about the latest health crisis, their reactions a mix of concern and panic. The constant barrage of information only served to reinforce her fears, creating a feedback loop that was hard to escape. In conversations with others, Sarah found that she was not alone in her fears. Many people around her harbored similar anxieties, fueled by the same media narratives that had ensnared her. A neighbor, Mark, had developed a fear of germs after his daughter had a severe illness. He wore gloves everywhere and avoided public spaces, convinced that every surface was a breeding ground for disease. His fear had become so consuming that he lost his job, unable to face the daily commute on public transport. Then there was Lisa, a coworker who had developed a phobia of hospitals after a family member's prolonged illness. She would often excuse herself from work when she had to attend medical appointments, her anxiety rendering her unable to step foot in a clinic. The fear of disease had become a shared experience, a silent epidemic that spread through their community, fueled by the pervasive influence of media and the internet. As Sarah's world continued to shrink, she realized that her coping mechanisms were not enough to combat the fear that had taken hold of her life. Seeking professional help became a necessity. She found a therapist who specialized in anxiety disorders, a beacon of hope in her darkened world. The therapist guided her through the process of exposure therapy, slowly introducing her to the very things she feared. It was terrifying, but with each small step, Sarah began to reclaim parts of her life that had been lost. She learned to challenge her thoughts, to question the validity of her fears. "What evidence do I have that I will get sick?" her therapist would ask, prompting Sarah to confront the irrationality of her beliefs. It was a gradual process, filled with setbacks and moments of despair. But slowly, she began to understand that her fear, while valid, did not have to control her life. With time, Sarah found herself taking small risks. She ventured out to a cafe with a friend, her heart racing but her resolve stronger. She learned to breathe through the anxiety, to focus on the laughter and conversation rather than the fear of germs. Each outing was a victory, a testament to her resilience. She still had moments of doubt, days when the fear threatened to engulf her, but she was learning to navigate the storm. As she began to reclaim her life, Sarah also recognized the importance of community. She sought out support groups, connecting with others who understood her struggles. In sharing her story, she found solace in the shared experience of fear and recovery. Together, they discussed the impact of media on their perceptions of health, the ways in which sensationalized stories had fueled their anxieties. They learned to advocate for themselves, to seek balanced information, and to question the narratives that threatened to overwhelm them. Through these connections, Sarah discovered a sense of empowerment. She began to share her journey on social media, not as a means of seeking sympathy, but as a way to raise awareness about nosophobia and the psychological impacts of fear. She wrote about her struggles and triumphs, creating a platform for others to share their experiences. The response was overwhelming. People reached out, grateful to find a voice that echoed their own fears. In time, Sarah learned to navigate the world with a newfound perspective. She still felt the pangs of anxiety, but they no longer paralyzed her. Instead, they served as reminders of her strength and resilience. She understood that while the fear of disease might never fully dissipate, it did not have to define her existence. Each day was a choice, a step toward reclaiming the life she once loved. As she sat on her porch one sunny afternoon, watching the world bustle by, Sarah reflected on her journey. The sun warmed her skin, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had learned to embrace the uncertainty of life, to find beauty in the moments between fear and joy. Nosophobia had shaped her, but it had not broken her. Instead, it had ignited a fire within her, a desire to live fully, to connect deeply, and to advocate for those still trapped in the shadows of fear.